Hey there, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today, because we're about to look at a universally beloved character in a way you've probably literally never considered before. We all know Chandler Bing, right? The funny one from Friends, the king of sarcasm. But today, we're exploring him through a completely different, honestly much darker lens. We're going to imagine an alternate path where the exact thing that made him so lovable actually becomes his ultimate downfall. So, let's just dive right into this.
Here's the big question. What if Chandler Bing's humor was actually his cage? Just imagine it. You walk into a room, everyone is laughing, having a great time, but the guy making all the jokes, the absolute life of the party, is actually slowly disappearing behind those very same jokes. In this alternate reality we're exploring, there's no vulnerability whatsoever. No honest, late-night confessions, no big emotional breakthroughs. There is only distance, and it's carefully, perfectly disguised as humor. Now, that tension was always kind of bubbling under the surface of his character anyway, right? But today, we're picturing a version of Chandler where that defensive wall literally never cracks, a world where he never learns to sit with the uncomfortable stuff or, admit his fears.
Let's lay out the real stakes for our explainer today. In the original timeline, the story we all know and love, his armor eventually breaks down. He allows himself to be vulnerable, and true connection wins the day. But in our alternate path, that armor stays completely, tightly sealed. Fear actually wins. And this isn't just some tiny, insignificant tweak to his personality. As we're going to see, this one small shift reshapes absolutely everything about his life and his relationships.
Which brings us to the first big piece of this puzzle, the unbreakable humor armor.
To really wrap our heads around this alternate Chandler, we've got to look at his origins. This is a guy whose early life was totally defined by his parents' messy divorce and some incredibly awkward family dynamics. So from a really young age, he built up this lifelong habit of turning his pain into punchlines. For him, humor wasn't just this quirky little personality trait, it was a hardcore survival mechanism. The expectation to always be the funny guy becomes a cage he never escapes. Now, at first glance in this alternate timeline, nothing really seems all that different. He's still sitting there on that big orange couch at Central Perk, he's still super sarcastic, he's still deflecting tension with these perfectly timed jokes, and his friends are still laughing, because, well, that's exactly what they expect from him. But beneath all that laughter, he's using those jokes to actively step away from any real, honest confessions. He's just performing, he isn't actually connecting.
And this performance totally bleeds over into his romantic life, which leads us to pushing Monica away.
Emotional closeness doesn't usually just vanish overnight in some huge dramatic explosion. It actually fades in these very small, nearly invisible ways. And nowhere is this quiet tragedy more obvious than in his relationship with Monica. This heartbreaking cycle starts to happen. Step 1. Monica, who deeply, deeply values emotional clarity and connection, reaches in to get deeper with him. Step 2. Chandler retreats. Conversations start getting a little serious, and boom, he jokes his way out of them faster than anyone even notices. When a moment of real intimacy pops up, he just takes this tiny half step back, just enough to avoid being fully seen. And then, step 3, Monica tries again, but this time with a lot less certainty. That one little half step back changes the entire dynamic of their relationship. It creates this constant, lingering instability.
There's a quote that really hits the nail on the head here. Care alone isn't enough when one person refuses to be emotionally available. The real tragedy of this alternate timeline isn't that Monica and Chandler just suddenly stop caring about each other. They totally do care. But Monica eventually has to face this really heartbreaking realization. You literally cannot love someone into openness if they completely refuse to step out from behind their defenses. And the saddest part? This realization doesn't end in some explosive, throwing plates kind of fight. It just leads to confusion and then, eventually, sheer exhaustion.
Think about the difference. In the original story, Chandler actually learns to stay present in uncomfortable moments, and he builds a relationship grounded in real connection. But in our alternate relationship, because he never commits to vulnerability, their bond stays incredibly guarded. It's totally conditional, it's built entirely around safety rather than depth. And over time, for Monica, even love itself starts to feel like this massive amount of effort with zero emotional reward. It just fades into a quiet acceptance of an irreversible ending.
And it's not just Monica. Let's talk about the lonely funny man and his friends.
Chandler's emotional wall doesn't just isolate him romantically, it sends these quiet ripples through the entire friend group's dynamics. Think about it. Everyone else in the group is bringing something real to the surface, right? Ross is passionately talking about science and the messy realities of his love life. Rachel is sharing this huge journey of growth and independence. Phoebe is bringing her completely unpredictable but super genuine wisdom. And then there's Chandler. Even Joey starts to notice that while Chandler makes absolutely everyone laugh, he never shares anything real about his own life. He's always present, for sure, but rarely open. He's just hovering right there on the surface of their lives.
Ultimately, Chandler becomes the friend that everyone enjoys being around, but literally no one fully knows. Friendship, in this alternate version of the story, becomes something a lot lighter. Sure, it's easier, but man, it is profoundly lonelier. Because true emotional closeness isn't just built on spending hours together hanging out in a coffee shop. It's built on shared truth. And by staying totally closed off, Chandler deprives himself of that genuine connection.
So what does this do to him on the inside? Let's dive into the exhaustion of performance.
We've seen how this affects everyone else, but keeping up this comedic shield takes an absolute psychological toll on Chandler himself. It leads directly to emotional avoidance. And if you're not familiar, emotional avoidance is a defense mechanism that doesn't actually protect you from pain at all. It really just delays it and makes it way heavier later on. This is Chandler's core flaw in this timeline. He honestly thinks his humor is keeping him safe. But by rerouting every single personal question, turning every awkward moment into a joke, and making every opportunity for honesty into a stand-up routine, he is actually just accumulating this massive invisible weight.
The tragic irony of the whole shebang is that he builds an entire life where he's always on. He is constantly entertaining, constantly deflecting tension, making absolutely everyone else in the room feel perfectly comfortable. But the cost? He is never resting in who he actually is beneath all that performance. He remains perpetually uncomfortable himself. It's just an exhausting, relentless way to live.
Which brings us to the final piece of this puzzle, the ultimate price of safety.
What are the long-term, irreversible consequences of living a completely closed-off life like this? What happens when that absolutely crucial lesson, that vulnerability doesn't destroy connection but actually creates it? What happens when that simply never arrives? In the original story, Chandler's emotional growth turns him into this stable emotional anchor for his friends. But here, when someone refuses to be vulnerable, they're also refusing to be a stable emotional mirror for the people around them. I mean, people can't lean on what they can't access, right? So he just remains the funniest person in the room who never actually lets the room inside him. And over the years, all that laughter starts to feel a lot less like a bridge connecting him to his friends, and way more like a solid, impenetrable barrier just keeping them all out.
You know, nothing wildly dramatic needs to happen to ruin a life. You really don't need a huge catastrophe. Sometimes a life feels incomplete just through a series of small, quiet moments where honesty was completely possible and it was just actively chosen against. Alternate Chandler remains totally stuck in the exact role he was trying so hard to escape, which proves that emotional openness isn't just about romantic relationships, it's really about true belonging.
So, I'll leave you with this. Are you editing your life for safety, or are you actually allowing yourself to be known? It is so powerful to look at such a familiar character like Chandler Bing and realize how these tiny choices about vulnerability change absolutely everything. Seriously, don't let your armor become your cage. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you something to think about, and I absolutely cannot wait to dive into our next topic with you.